And welcome back to podcast number 2. This time you get to see our glorious and inglorious faces.
Yes, indeed.
Uh,
I'm
well,
going to
you've seen
start
him
the stream
before.
as
This is
well.
the first.
While we're
Huh?
at, I'm going to start the stream now as well. So we're going to do this live while we record it.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, you guys get to see us live. That's fun. Okay, so getting into it, this is obviously our Sunday podcast, which is a more serious tone and topic. My
And I
computer.
would like to point out the amazing fact that tonight you're able to see this gorgeous person.
Oh, oh, thank you. Please stop. Okay,
Okay,
anyway.
drama queen. Oh my god.
Anyway, why don't you let everybody know what our current podcast is going to be about?
All right. So last Sunday we did a 1 hour discussion um, based upon a video from Papito Kin. I
Mm-hmm.
still don't know if I'm saying that correctly. uh,
Papito King. No, yeah.
um, but anyway, we did a discussion on one of his videos based on Krea's Conundrums, which are a series of questions which are raised by the character of Krea in Star Wars The Old Republic, or Knights of the
Mhm.
Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, which is a game on Steam. I will highly recommend it. Um, but yes, um,
And by the way, just so it's known, all our podcasts will not revolve around Papito King, and they will not revolve around uh, Knights of the Old Republic or games
yeah.
entirely. It's just a good way to start off when going into many other things.
And I'm also going to do a big disclaimer here. We are not using Papito Kin's videos or any other videos to draw in popularity. Um,
Oh yeah,
I would
it's not
highly
like
recommend that you go to his channel if you're interested in his content from what you see, and to check out his stuff, because a lot of it is very, very interesting, and I'll recommend it. You're
even
not
though I
going to
don't always
see.
agree with his stuff.
Mm, um, Now, the reason why we show those videos is I think that he has created a great resource. Now, I am personally absolutely open to not use videos in our podcasts if if it becomes an issue. But I think that this is better rather than taking out clips from other people's videos and then referencing, because things get taken out of context and it gets messy. So
Indeed.
um, this is why I decided to go for this method uh, rather than just cutting out clips and things like that, and trying to make things my own when they're not, and so on. Um, I'm just trying to be honest.
Yeah, that's fine. Do what you gotta do, man. Anyway, enough of the boring preliminary talk. Let's start
All
this shit
right.
up.
So yeah, last week we talked about charity, and moving on from charity is another very interesting topic which we did touch a little bit while we talked about charity. It does come up naturally. It's this topic about doing nothing, abstaining from action, uh, or apathy. Uh, would you like to say something about apathy? What is apathy?
So, okay, so yeah, there are several distinctions we're going to make throughout the video between apathy and things that may seem like apathy but are not, or may actually be like just as bad but in a different way.
Hmm.
So for now, I guess I'll chalk up apathy to like the disinterest in a situation and the not taking any stance at all.
Hmm.
And this is going to be important when we distinguish it between things like moral inaction, which we talked about last time with charity, like doing nothing is sometimes the best thing. It's very different from apathy, and we're going to have to try and distinguish what situations call for what, obviously. But it really is the disinterest and lack of taking any stance whatsoever in a situation.
Right.
At least that's how I see it. How about you, Stan?
And well, I personally agree. And I think one thing we can add to that is um, that apathy is not laziness per se. So it's not um, the lack of action. It's not the yeah, it's not just sitting around at home doing nothing all day or just things like that. Um, it's something much more ideological, I guess you could say, and it's not just it's not just an idea. It's also connected to choice. So it's not just about doing nothing. It's also about not choosing in a situation where you have to make a choice. It's actually uh, personally abstaining from that situation, pulling yourself out of it. Uh,
I got a reference for you.
hmm,
Pontius Pilate washing his hands of the matter.
hmm, exactly.
Yeah, I knew you'd like that, Stan.
Although, even that's not exactly apathy because he did make a choice. Uh, he chose to give the decision to the people who were making the accusation. So he
We're gonna
did
have to
make a
like
judicial choice, and then he um, carried out the execution of that
we're
judgment.
gonna I think we're gonna in that we'll discuss it later, but I think we might disagree on that. But we'll talk about it later, like I
Hmm.
said. Yeah.
Oh, um, okay. So I think in preparation, um, so you guys can see what Kreia as a character, a very special, unique character, has to say about apathy. And also Papito Keen's own thoughts on the matter. And I think we can take it from there. It's not a very long video, it's actually shorter than the previous one. This one is 8 minutes.
Cool.
Uh, so yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Let's see what they have to say.
Apathy is death.
For the
Worse
sake of
than
this, I'm
death.
going to mute my side so that my sound doesn't come through because clearly I don't have a lovely, beautiful headset like this guy
Hmm. That's fine. Okay.
Because at least a rotting corpse feeds the beasts and insects.
I'm just going to turn back to 0. Let's begin.
Apathy is death. Worse than death. Because at least a rotting corpse feeds the beasts and insects.
It's a very convincing argument, isn't it? You have the ability to do something, but instead you stand there and do nothing. You take up space and resources and produce nothing. You're like Darth Nihilus, you destroy what you don't create. You're guilty of the sin of sloth. That's one interpretation of it, at least. Many discussions on Kreia eventually lead to this scene being brought up. But no matter how you interpret Kreia's words, there's only one problem.
Atten, I've had enough of your snide contempt. Stay out of this, Beodor. This is a personal dispute between Atten and myself.
Did you catch it? This isn't Kreia. The biggest giveaway is the fact that she refers to your party members by name. She always calls Beodur the alien and Atten the fool. But also remember that Kreia wouldn't set foot on Korriban. She's back on the ship.
If you walk Korriban's surface, You shall walk it without me. This place is strong with the dark side. It is difficult to center myself here.
Remember where you are in this scene. You're on Korriban, but more specifically, you're inside the tomb of Ludocrash. Korriban radiates dark side energy, but it's even more potent inside the tombs. What does the dark side do? It corrupts. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that it tries to bring you over to its side. I imagine a location that radiates with the light side of the Force would try to do the same. That could be considered corruption as well, but it would obviously go about it differently. The dark side wants to break you violently, and if it fails, it kills you. This is a manifestation of the tomb of Ludocrash, and so is all your companions. The game gives you the option to recognize this and say that this is just another trick. When everyone shows up and array themselves against Kreia, you're given the option to either help Kreia, help your friends, or do nothing. If you choose to do nothing, the tomb attempts to influence you, and it does so in a particularly clever way.
So you will do nothing? Apathy is death.
The Cambridge Dictionary defines apathy as behavior that shows no interest or energy and shows that someone is unwilling to take action, especially over something important. But can you really say that the exile is being apathetic in this scene if she does nothing? She recognized that what's happening isn't real, it's a setup. Notice what happens when you do pick a side.
I will be honest with you. I have fallen to the dark side. Does this change your decision?
If you side with Kreia under the guise of anyone can and should be redeemed back into the light, you receive light side points. If you side with your friends,
You of all people would judge me so? Am I not worthy of redemption?
and kill Kreia under the guise of you've been manipulating me, you dark side witch. It's about time I end you, and you strike her down in anger, you receive dark side points. The whole point of this tomb is for you to receive those dark side points. But the Force itself wouldn't care if you receive dark or light. These dark and light side scales are tilted due to someone's state of mind. Kreia meditated to center herself. She needed to keep her mind in balance. Listen to what Vizaz says before confronting Darth Nihilus.
What happens now shall not be done out of hate or revenge, but for the sake of all life.
She did what she did, not because Nihilus killed her people and then made her a slave. She came to terms with what happened, and now she will stop Nihilus for the preservation of life. That was her mindset. Like I mentioned before, Kreia refused to set foot on Korriban because
It is difficult to center myself here.
if you had traveled to a planet that was a Force nexus for the light side of the Force, she wouldn't set foot on that either. No matter which side you fall into, you open yourself up to the Force. If the exile wasn't a wound in the Force, choosing a side in this situation would have been more harmful than doing nothing. So taking the situation into regard, realizing that this is a trick, there's nothing to gain by picking a side, and instead there might be more to lose. She consciously decided that the best course of action in this instance was to do nothing. There's a difference between apathy and choosing to do nothing. Do you remember the stories I told in Charity about giving money to impoverished people? If I had decided not to give them anything, then that would have been my choice, and I would have a reason as to why I didn't. It may not even be a very good reason, but it was a reason nonetheless. If I had walked past them and their existence barely registered with me, or I just say, whatever, it doesn't matter, that would be apathy. Like Force alignment, the dichotomy between apathy and purposeful inaction comes down to a person's state of mind. But the Tomb of Ludocrash is telling you, no, this is apathy, and apathy is bad, apathy is death, worse than death, because at least then you can serve some kind of purpose. It instills doubt. It can make you go, you have a point. Maybe I really should have done something, anything. It instills regret. You don't get a second chance, you've already made the decision. By the end of this entire trial, the exile can tell Kreia that she doesn't think that this experience will change her for the better. Experiences with the dark side don't have to change you right away after all. It can influence decisions you make in the future. You may find yourself in another situation where doing nothing may be the best course of action, but this experience may make you doubt that, and you could end up deciding to do something or picking a side, and you end up causing more harm. But Kreia suggested that the exile go through this experience because it is valuable.
Never doubt what you have done.
Be mindful of situations. Think things through. Get some advice if you need to. And when you make a decision, even if the decision is to abstain, don't keep second guessing yourself. If it turns out you made a mistake, then learn from it. This ordeal also gave the exile perspective on things, as she stuck by her principles. But is she willing to admit that mistakes were made regardless? Maybe certain things could have gone differently. Is she ready to put herself first? Within reason, of course. No extremes of only caring about herself or only caring about others.
Recognize where your true loyalties lie, to the galaxy and yourself. Do you speak of all your battles? Or are there some you wish to forget?
And finally, can she let go of her past and face the future?
Well,
Yo.
so yeah, that's a very deep video there.
It is.
Uh,
I do disagree with him though, but go on.
Which point in particular? Because he said many different things.
Namely the aspect of. So he introduces the video with this decision between whether to kill this Kreia or not, or completely abstain from the situation. And for him, that's a moment of what I'll call moral inaction. I don't know if we want to go straight into that, but I will disagree with that point. But anyway, go on.
No, Key. Say what you think in general.
I mean, so okay, as I said, apathy is first of all, what's said in that video, and not from him, but from what Kreia, I'll put quotation marks Kreia because clearly he points out that that's not Kreia, says about apathy, namely that apathy is death or worse than death. Which I think morally I agree with. After all, when you think about it, it is through death. First of all, your camera's not working.
I'm switching things around.
Okay.
Just so I think the stream can't pick up my camera.
Okay. Well,
when
I'll
it's
just
like
continue.
this, but
I'll just continue.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Like, there is that notion that in doing nothing, you allow bad or wrong or evil to be done. That there's that quote. Evil is not a lack of. Evil comes out of a lack of action against evil, or something along those lines. You know what I'm talking about, right?
yeah.
Yeah, this quote, which basically says as it is inaction, the lack of will to do what is against wrong, that allows wrong. It is washing your hands of the matter, which is why I disagreed earlier. That is apathy. Apathy is I take no stance in this, and therefore I abstain from the matter completely. I want to say that that's different from the cases we saw with charity, because in charity, the issue isn't that the person decided to take a stance. and that's what caused wrong things to happen. It's that the charity done was charity without wisdom, without thought into the repercussions of that charity. It's
Right.
good intention, it's naive good intention. That's different from apathy, because you can still, for example, if I see a starving society, if I throw money at them all day, that doesn't solve any issue. That's charity with good
Absolutely.
intention, which may lead to bad results. But if I go over there and I start a farm, or I start teaching the people how to cultivate food, I'm doing an action. It is still a form of charity because I am giving time, and I am still giving a form of resource to start these things up.
Yes.
But that may lead to better results. There is no, like, moral inaction is only in the decision of, do I give money or not? Perhaps it's better to not. And there are situations where one should morally, there is a cause for moral inaction, such as, say, two people are in an argument with each other over how they wronged each other. Yeah, less a situation comes about where you need to intervene, perhaps it's better to let them hash it out. But that's not the lack of taking a stance either. You're still taking a stance. You're still looking for the good outcome. You're just restricting your way of acting so that you don't act naively in a way that will make it worse. It's also why I disagree with that his idea in the video towards the situation itself. Yes, it can be an illusion of the dark side, and of the dark side of the force within that place. But so first of all, one thing I noticed is that, and I'm very limited on my knowledge of Star Wars, so I only have like some instances of the movies and this. Is that whenever a Jedi goes into a dark side place, it doesn't necessarily always try to pull them to the dark side, but in fact, it tests their resolve in the light side. It tests their alliances to what they claim to believe in through a number of minutes. So it's trying to pull you to the dark side, but only because it's questioning how well founded you are in the light side.
That's very true. Especially in these Star Wars situations, what happens is that um, people are exposed to a different idea uh, than what they're usually um, than what they usually believe,
Mm-hmm.
which immediately forces them essentially to question what they already know. And
Mm-hmm.
if we think about it, that's one thing that I agree with Peter Kin, is that the light side in Star Wars does exactly the same thing, um, but maybe in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even Master Yoda in, I think it was The Empire Strikes Back, uh, says that you must unlearn what you have learned. It's a very famous quote from Yoda, um, which essentially faces you with the reality that in order to learn something completely new or to stretch your boundaries, you have to give up what you already have or what you think you already know.
Or at least question it,
Or
at least,
question it, yeah.
yeah, because this is how we test our resolve on any ideal and how we're able to test the validity of an idea.
And this is why it, with the danger of turning this into a Star Wars talk more than an apathy talk, uh, it's but the rabbit trails are just way too interesting. Um, in The Last Jedi, we have um, what was her name again? Rey. Um, we have Rey going into a dark side nexus,
Mm-hmm.
a dark side place, just like Luke went into the cave.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, what happened to her? It's questionable how much it really tested her in any way. It was a very strange sort of experience.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
hear you. Luckily, there are plenty of videos which try and highlight the oddness of the new Star Wars movies.
yeah, um, but yeah, going back to what we were saying, um, these visions are they're there with a certain purpose, which
Mhm.
sometimes might be rather elusive and might be very long term.
Yeah.
Um, but then, what does that tell us about apathy then? Um, how how do we decide whether we should ever do nothing in a situation, even though ideally we understand? I think most people would understand that sometimes it's better to just let things be
Yes.
than to intervene. For
Yes.
example, you have a son or a daughter who might find themselves in a situation which you might not really approve of. Um, and I think most of us have been in that position,
Mm-hmm.
um, on one side or the other. Um,
Yep.
and I is it really better to not do anything ever? Um,
Well, like it depends on the. I think it still depends on the situation, and like part of I think what allows or distinguishes between apathy and what may instead be moral action is who is being kept in mind at the moment. Apathy is more towards the end of selfish thought, in my opinion, the way I see it,
mm.
in that I don't want to get involved in some idea of preservation of myself. That's why I don't want to get involved. I don't want the headache, or I don't want the guilt or the blame, you know? I don't want to be part of something because of how it may, of how taking the decision may affect me in some way. I think an example of that could be like, for example, if I see people being beat up and I don't do anything, I'm turning away simply because I don't want to get involved and get in trouble. You know what I
But
mean?
you see, is that apathy?
I think so. So,
Uh,
for example, actually, there's a
because
very,
uh,
there's a,
sorry, because what's happening there is that you see a situation and you do a
mhm,
calculation. If I do
yeah.
this, there will be a certain outcome for that person and for me, or if I do that, I'm going then there will be a different outcome, and so I choose to do this, and or lack of doing in this case.
Well,
So
see,
there is a calculation there which obviously shows that you're not exactly apathetic in the sense of not caring.
well, actually, here's the thing. This is another thing I disagree with. Apathy is not the lack of making a choice. Apathy is still a choice. You can, because the only thing you don't make a choice about is something you're not aware about. But say, for example,
This is funny because you're reminding me of a movie that we watched tonight, uh, which is The Fantastic Four and Silver Surfer.
mm,
Remember that?
yeah,
Um,
long time,
and remember where the Invisible Woman tells the Silver Surfer that there's always a choice.
yeah, there
um,
actually there is. Like, so going back to the situation. So for example, there's a very serious and very important case here in New York that was dealt with, but still has repercussions, and there's still a movement. It's around this person named Junior. Or yeah, I know not too much, but apparently what happened was he was being chased by a bunch of gang members, ran into a store for safety, and the store owner said, "I don't want to get involved. Get out of my store."
Right.
The kid was forced out of the store, and then there was killed. So the owner cared more about self-preservation than. So that was a case of apathy for me. There's a decision being made, and the decision is I don't want to get involved.
Right.
Moral inaction is not I don't want to get involved. Moral inaction is I will be involved, but in this specific way. I still want to make sure things don't get out of hand. So moral inaction for me actually signifies I am waiting for when I need to step in, because I know now is not the time I need to step in. Apathy is I don't want to step in at all. And because of that, a person died. Several people were sent to prison for life, I believe. The store owner lost their store because they were boycotted out for obvious reasons. That's an apathy. I mean, that's apathy. There's still completely a choice.
I agree. Would you say that pacifism falls into that category? Like absolute pacifism?
That's difficult. So
because most people probably know, but there are people in the world who do not believe in killing. Very often they are or hurting anyone or anything. Very often these are very strict Buddhists, for example, or Hindus, who really believe in the teaching of ahimsa and non-violence. So those people, they refuse to participate in any conflict, whatever the situation is. So they would never take any sort of violent action. And usually that's led to is that, for example, during a war situation, they would restrict themselves into performing medical roles or things like that, where they do not participate in the actual conflict. What do you have to say? What do you think about that?
So pacifism, I don't want to put pacifism in apathy automatically. I still think it requires a sense of wisdom, because you can be a pacifist, but still take a stance and still act against an injustice. I think the perfect example is Martin Luther King, who preached nothing but pacifism, but clearly took a stance on matters occurring. His method, though, was through action that did not revolve around violence, but still revolved around change and disapproving of the current systems, and even acting against the current systems without acting violently. So that's why I think this term civil disobedience came about, where instead of going out and like beating up people or going out and being violent in any way or even fighting back, literally the movement was about going against unjust laws, the repercussion of going to jail without fighting back, but then treating that moment of going to jail as not as something to be looked down upon, but as something to be praised because you went to jail, you underwent a trial for the sake of something good and just. So I actually don't think pacifism in itself is apathy. it depends on still whether you're willing to take a stance or not. So I can be a pacifist, see people being beat up or abused in some physical way, and still find a way to step in while still being a pacifist, versus saying, I'm a pacifist, I don't do violence, let me stand out, yada
See,
yada.
I agree, and just to go down on another rabbit hole, or while we're at it,
I love rabbit holes.
love
While
them.
you're doing that, I'm listening, but I'm also going to get another book out
That's
just
fine.
to show it. Go
Um,
on.
Now, what uh, what I feel has happened over the past few decades uh,
Mm-hmm.
is that people have become increasingly tired of the way that governments have been running, um,
Yeah.
and the way leadership has been acting. And what that has led to is a mentality of a lot of people to disobedience, just as you say, disapproval, public disapproval,
Yeah.
um, and public disapproval has somehow immediately become um, connected with violent protests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I think that's mostly being happening in America. Now, I don't live there. Uh, just for anyone who doesn't know, Alex here is from New York, and I'm from London. So as you can see, with me it's dark. With him, I think there's still some light where you are,
A little bit.
a little
Yeah.
bit. But um, yeah, here in Europe it doesn't happen so much, but it still does happen every once in a
Yeah.
while. But mostly in America, we see these extremely violent protests, and we see an amazing amount of violence between two opposing sides, which um, you would really think that political issues like that shouldn't, in this day and age, should not cause that level of violence between people, and yet they do, because people become so carried away in their emotion that they begin to immediately associate the opposing side with something evil and
Yeah.
horrible. So you have the liberal side accusing the conservative side of being racist and every, evil thing under the sun. And then the other side accuses the liberals of being corrupt and too tolerant and, tolerant to the point of being inactive and oppressive and so on and so forth. You see it all the time, and people
Yeah.
really become heated about that.
Yeah.
Um,
You see this ability, this like split between the two.
yeah, and I feel like this feeling of a non-violent protest has somehow become lost
Well,
over the years,
mm-hmm.
um, and it's possible that people have become uh, how should I say this? They associate a non-violent protest with apathy, not doing anything. So
It like
they begin to feel like, okay, unless we begin to act this way, nobody will listen and nobody will notice and nothing will change.
no, I
And
get.
it's a very interesting correlation that's been made there, probably quite
Yeah.
faulty.
I completely. In fact, honestly, I think the motion towards violence that we still have is so. For one, I'm not a pacifist. I am. I do believe in the notion of self-defense. I do believe that violence has its place, but I believe that violence has its place as a response to violence, but as a last means of response to violence. So if someone's literally about to punch me, I'm not going to stand there and take it. I'll defend myself. But I'll defend myself only to the point where I can end the situation and not more. I won't then stop the situation and then continue going to make sure I beat this person to a bloody pulp. That's too much action. Just as there's too little action, which I agree with. That's the whole idea of slacktivism and whatnot, where you do the least amount and then feel good. There's also the sense of too much action, which is doing overboard in terms of that won't actually be constructive. And this is just prone to violence. And it's a very archaic notion that it is through violence that things must change. Again, Martin Luther King showed a great example of relatively modern day society being able to be altered without the need for violent means.
Um,
And without on top of that, I just want to add another thing Martin Luther King does beautifully, which I think people should look at. Unlike other individuals, Martin Luther King doesn't otherize people. The white society is not the enemy in Martin Luther King's protest or in his vision, because sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down at the table of brotherhood. This is saying that everybody is redeemable. There is no true sense of an enemy. And as you were saying, that's the issue between liberal and conservative. And I see it all the time on like my Facebook, because I add everybody and I don't believe in, I'm trying to like break my echo chamber.
Same.
Yeah, that's the thing. We have to break our echo chambers and break our foundations, only our ideas. Doubting our ideas, or like having our ideas questioned. But like, go on.
On that point, just to bring back the video on Kreia, what we see there, the interesting, and I think Papito can notice that and mention it in the video, is that the option which you are told is apathetic in the game and in that situation actually isn't. And it's actually guilt tripping you into thinking that it is. Now, what's happening there is that the game, or really in that context, the Force, the dark side of the Force, is giving you two extreme options. If you help them, you're against her, and you must kill her. If you are with her, you must kill them. And you must choose one or the other, because these are the only two things which you can choose of, and you have no other choice. And if you don't make a choice between those two, you're apathetic, and apathy is death, worse than death.
Wait, so here's the question. I just want to ask, because again, I never played Knights of the Old Republic, so I don't know the full situation. According to me, well, from what I saw in that video, the choice is either kill Kreia because she went to the dark side, or allow her redemption because everybody can be redeemed to the light side. I didn't know. But then
the others attack you.
Yeah, I didn't know. See, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. This is why I still feel that standing out is apathy, and why I feel that choosing to protect her is the correct choice.
It is the only light side choice in that situation.
Not only is it the only light side choice, but the thing is, in choosing to protect her, you don't initiate the attack on them. They initiate the attack on you. So you're taking a stance, and then you're giving them the opportunity to make a moral decision whether to attack you or not.
That is true.
This is why, for me personally, I disagree with his view, because standing out is allowing the evil of someone to die without any chance of trying to at least rectify the situation. To me, that's not moral. To me, that's not moral inaction, because as I said earlier, for me, moral inaction is standing by when necessary to step in to avoid the worst outcome.
Yeah. But it's just interesting how the game does that.
Yeah.
And the two extremes that it puts you in. It really puts you into that sort of extreme situation.
Yeah.
Like one of those moral conundrums that philosophers like to pull out of their, um, I will not say any rude places.
Armpits?
Yeah. You know, out of nowhere. And it's
Like the
these
charge
sort of,
problem.
yeah, these sorts of abstract choices that you have to make, which are really impossible. And it's it's actually very easy to put a person in that situation, which is
Yeah.
highly unrealistic. For example, one I love this little saying. Uh, you ask somebody, "Have you stopped beating your wife yet?" Now, think about that. How are you
Yeah.
going to answer that? If you answer yes, then you admit that you have beaten her. If you answer no, then you're still beating her, and either way, you're guilty. It's a
Yeah.
question which presupposes your guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's these are very abstract situations which are often put against us, which are very often not realistic.
True.
It's as you said, it's not really always us against them. It's a very, I must say, it's a very media influenced view.
No, yeah,
We are right and they're wrong, and they're evil.
I agree with
And this
you.
is the sort of propaganda that's being pushed on people for many, many decades now, since
Yeah.
media has been invented, really.
Even before that, just like
Yeah.
propaganda has been a thing since I mean, even Alexander the Great used imagery to promote his death. I think Tiberius, Emperor of Rome. Well, one of the emperors of Rome did so as well. In fact, Pompey the Great actually tried to replicate Alexander the Great because of this idea of propaganda behind status and image.
Mm-hmm.
And fun fact, even the term barbarian was actually a means of trying to create a distinction between us and them, us the
Yep.
civilized and them the
Mm-hmm.
uncultured,
Yep.
that we must conquer and we must bring to status and everything.
Absolutely. Now, this it made me think when I started talking about this right now. It made me think about the absolute tolerance that we have been pushed into, we're being pushed into it from a very faulty angle, uh, where today you have to tolerate all differences and all other people and anything people like, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. So if it doesn't bother anyone else, then it's all right. Um, and we can tolerate that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I believe I believe that's a faulty sense of unity that is extremely easy to break down. Um, and it does break down, like almost immediately at the smallest sort of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sort of unity in a society where um, people try to ignore each other's differences instead of actually accepting them. Um,
Yeah.
so my personal view on that is that um, real unity between people can only happen when people forget about, well, not really forget, that's a bad way of saying it, but um, when people begin really to think of all other cultures and all other people uh, as family, like a distant sort of family. And
Yeah.
for me, that's very easy. But for a lot of people, for example, I have Filipino friends,
Mm-hmm.
and I have mentioned in some conversations that for me, they are very distant cousins,
Yeah.
very very distant cousins, but cousins nonetheless.
Mhm.
And for them, that's a very weird idea. Uh, it's a very strange idea because then they start going, oh, incest and things like that. And it's it's just jumping from one extreme to the other, and it's not moving a little bit to that central point where we realize, yes, we are all of one blood. To
Yeah, I
take the
mean,
old sayings from the past, we're of one blood. Uh, we're all the same under our skins. It doesn't really matter where you come from or how you're raised.
no, I
Yeah.
agree. Like for example, before your wow, it's totally slipping my mind. Okay, I'm gonna say British for now. Before you're British and Bulgarian,
Mm.
you're human.
Yep.
Before Trump supporter supports Trump, they are human. Before Hillary supporter supports Hillary, they are human.
Yep.
The end of the, before a Muslim and a Christian or a Muslim and Christian, they are human.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what we inherently have to see. And this is why arguably apathy is so terrible, because apathy is also abstaining from the duty we have to recognize, treat, and protect others like they are human.
Mm.
That's the thing. That's the curse of apathy. That, and human doesn't mean, oh yeah, they're a Homo sapien or anything. People confuse this. Humanness and Homo sapien are two different things. I don't care, and I'll be willing to argue in another video, but they really are two separate things. Even I'm, yeah, go on.
That's very interesting because you brought up the voting thing, and I think it's a classic example of people blaming others of apathy. Uh, I am a person who does not vote,
Okay.
uh, and I get asked a lot. If I ever mention it, really, I get asked, "Why wouldn't you vote?"
Yeah.
And even if I don't mention it, I can just listen around me and see what's happening. The sorts of
Yeah.
questions that are flying around me, which are, uh, you know, it. Why wouldn't you vote? Don't you feel anything? Don't you feel a responsibility to make a change? And this is where um, I'm going to bring up a little picture.
Yeah, boy. Oh.
Uh,
Which poison do you want to drink? Why getting a
I
picture? I'm gonna
loved
get.
this little picture.
Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Don't hate me, but show the picture and everything.
Yep. So there's the picture, and we'll just wait for Alex to come back, unfortunately. um, yeah, this is a little meme that came out. Well, it's an old meme, really, but
Yeah, boy.
it's the top socket or the bottom socket.
Oh,
Me
yeah.
with the kid that's poking
Mhm.
in one. Uh, and around the Trump elections, it came out with Trump or Hillary, top socket or bottom socket. Which one are you going to poke in? Because either one, if you really look at them objectively, neither of
Yeah.
them are good candidates for a leader. Both of them have a corrupt past. Uh, you know, you cannot look at both of these individuals objectively and say, yeah, they're an amazing person.
Yeah. I
Because
agree.
you need to be completely, um, I don't know, blinkered and
Yeah.
ignore all of the evidence against both of them to begin
Mhm.
to defend them. And yet that's happened so much on both sides, where people on either side begin blaming the others,
Yeah.
um, and blaming those who don't vote for their candidate, calling them names of every horrible thing that they can call them, and and I think that's been, people who vote for Hillary went all like, if you don't vote for Hillary, it's going to be the end of the world, it's going to be the end of the country, all of this. And if those who vote for Trump, they're like, he's the only candidate. Yeah, we don't really like him that much, but he's the only one that stands against
Oh, there
Hillary.
are
So
people.
yeah,
No,
we're
there
gonna
are
go
people.
for him.
There
And
are people.
that's
We know people. Stan,
uh
we know people who like stand by him 100%.
yeah.
Even now.
So it's like, it's a very strange idea how somehow people have fallen into this position. Just like the exile in Star Wars is put by the dark side in that spot where
Yeah.
he has to choose kill this one or kill those. Um, it's the same sort of position, and it's a very bad position because it's false. The premise of the position is actually faulty. Um, where both of them are bad, and I'm actually personally abstaining from voting as a sign of my displeasure, my disapproval.
So actually, for the normally, I would say that not participating in the voting process and everything is a degree of apathy,
Mm.
and I would say that it's morally wrong. But I am going to currently, at the moment, doubt my position, and because honestly, when you think about it, like two evils, which are the same color of paint, I mean, which are different painted traps, basically. Like, to choose either one, this is action. Arguably, that can be said to be action without wisdom.
It
One
is.
must vote. You must do this.
Mm.
You have no choice. Don't even think about it. You must do this for what is good.
It's the same sort of. I'm sure this will ring strongly with Americans. You must pay the taxes to the king because that's the law,
Yeah,
right? No.
but see, even if you abstain from the voting process, it only becomes apathy when you don't care about what's going on and all you've done is abstain from the voting process.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, because then we again talk about civil disobedience, and civil disobedience is basically to go against a structure in society that is morally wrong, and voting. So I believe there's a line between voting as apathy and voting as civil disobedience. Voting as apathy is simply, I don't care, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Voting, lack of voting because of civil disobedience is, I knowingly see that my decision will not weigh in what is morally just, and therefore I refuse to make a decision that will not lead to a good moral outcome.
Yeah.
That being said, though, then comes this second level of laziness, So, it is completely fine to not vote out of civil disobedience, so long as that is not the full extent of your civil disobedience. That you should take it one step further, even if it's just spreading information about why. And some people might take it further and saying, okay, let us get a coalition of individuals who will abstain from voting for this particular reason.
Yeah.
And then even go further to say, okay, we abstain from voting, but let us try and start our own movement to fix what is shit, and then eventually maybe put up a candidate or rebel against the system, put up a candidate and then say, okay, now that we have a candidate we actually support and everything, go for it. I think that's why.
just to illustrate what happens when you have a corrupt system. A corrupt system will always try to find a way to preserve itself.
Oh yeah.
And when people stop following the system, then it will begin to try and crush those or somehow eliminate them, like a cancer, to try and preserve itself. To illustrate how this voting, this corrupt voting system works, I'll give you an example from my own country.
Go on.
Here's what's been happening in the past decade or so. What happened was that over the years, we've only been a democracy for about 30, 40 years, I think. Before that, we were a communist country for a few decades, and before that, we were a monarchy. And before, for about, I don't know, a couple of decades again. And before those, a few decades, we were enslaved. We were part of the Ottoman Empire. Now, so that's a quick context overview.
Okay.
So for these few decades of democracy, what's happened is that people in the beginning were incredibly enthusiastic about the democracy, and everybody voted, and everybody wanted to make a change. And the previous generations, even my father, when in his youth, they were part of these movements that tried to make changes. What happened is that those same people that ruled during the communist regime, became the ruling class essentially during the democratic period now. So now you have to somehow vote for those same people that you wanted to get rid of in the first place. And what's happened is that people have been increasingly losing their confidence in their leadership and all these parties, and we have a lot of parties. You think that you have choice. You should come to my country. We have a lot of choice. We have... one second. Дядо, колко партии имахме в България?
This is his sexy accent, everybody.
Бързо, просто наизуст. About 43. About 43 parties. So if you'd like choice, or yeah, they tend to, because there's so many of them, they tend to form coalitions and stuff. So if you'd like choice or the illusion of choice, come to my country. We got plenty. But this has led to disillusionment, an insane amount of disillusionment in people like me. And so we don't vote. A lot of our citizens are actually abroad. They have emigrated. So what has happened is that our electorate is divided between about 50% within the country, maybe even less than 50, and then the rest of the electorate is outside of the country. The problem is that an increasing amount of people have stopped voting. This has led to the elections having about a close to 50 but under 50% turnout of the electorate, which means that legally there can be no government during those elections, any elections really, because there's no party that has the required amount of votes. And so they start making coalitions. one of the last elections, we had a triple coalition, I think, between 3 very different parties.
Yeah.
And some of those parties are even coalitions themselves already. So you have coalitions of parties making a coalition to make a government, and so you have all these parties essentially going into government.
Look, it's a coalition within a coalition of a coalition and a coalition.
It becomes a complete farce. Why would you
Yeah.
even vote in the first place?
No, and
When all of these parties are going to end up in government anyway. And
yeah.
apart from that, because of these coalitions, they still couldn't. They're still having trouble getting the required amount of votes.
Mhm.
They tried to pass a law through Parliament,
Yeah.
which excluded those people who do not vote out of the electorate. So people like me would be cut out of the electorate. It's like we don't exist.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, well, that's very convenient, because that suddenly boosts up your figures. Suddenly, you have the required amount of percentage of the electorate to win.
Yeah.
And it's an absolute circus. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And so, like, here's the thing. So that government seems to suck.
It does, but it doesn't, because it's a
here's
system which keeps maintaining itself.
Here's another issue as well. I love how our talk went from apathy to politics, but politics are kind of the ultimate sense of like
It's an
practical.
example. Just as we said,
Yeah,
people blame each other of
Yeah.
apathy.
And no, and on top of that, politics technically is the pinnacle of moral weight. You know, the better your country
Supposedly,
is,
yeah.
I would actually argue that the better your country runs, it's more because of how morally inclined your country is.
Yeah.
A country that's
Absolutely.
less morally inclined will run like shit, and a country that's more morally inclined will run extremely fucking well. But going back to that, like even in this case, abstain from the vote, abstain from politics because politics is supposed to serve the will of the individuals being ruled over. People confuse this notion of, and there are several points I'm going to bring up, so give me like a moment. People
That's
confuse
fine.
this notion of ruler as they who are in charge over us, which is not true. True rulership is they are guardian over us. And guardian does not look at what you are guardian over as that exists for my sake. It looks at it more in the sense of I exist for its sake. I exist so that that which I am a guardian of will flourish to the best extent. It's not like I own a gold mine that exists for me. I own a garden which I must cater to so that it grows to its fullness. So people forget that notion. Rulers forget this idea of politics. On top of that, people forget that. So the emphasis on you must vote is because people think that change can only come through political systems. Political systems help with change. When the political systems themselves are not where they are and are existing as if they are divorced from the humans they are governing over, then it is the responsibility, the duty, which that's the ultimate distinction here. Apathy is contra duty, against duty. The duty of a citizen, I said duty, is
It's all right.
to then figure out some alternative for achieving the same result. For example, here in America, the education system is a farce. But that's part of that is
Sorry,
due to government.
out of interest,
Go on.
while you've been talking, I looked up the word apathy.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the origin of the word apathy.
Okay.
Apparently, it comes from early 17th century French and Greek through Latin.
Mm-hmm.
So we start with the Greek word apatheia or apatheia,
Mm-hmm.
from apathes, without feeling,
Mm.
without plus pathos, suffering.
Yeah.
So that I always like to. I'm an English major, by the way, guys. So it is kind of
Comparative
a
written
hobby of
form.
mine to find out what words actually mean and where they come from.
And no,
So
it's
yeah,
important because
sorry.
no. Sorry for cutting you off, actually. No, it's actually really important to look at the etymology of things as well, because words are ideas in essence.
They
They are
mean
the ways
things.
you can, yeah, exactly. Well, they communicate ideas, and so when we really want to get to the understanding of a word, you need to look up the etymology and everything because it helps. I was having this whole discussion with a professor of mine in one of my comparative lit courses. And yeah, etymology of words is extremely. This is why you have, like, for example, when you want to understand this word human, yeah, connect it not to Homo sapien or anything like that. Connect it to terms like humane, inhumanity, one's things like that, to get a better sense of what it means to be human. And again, that's for another time because that's a whole fucking thing in itself.
Out
But
of
going back to what I was
curiosity,
saying, huh? Oh
out
my
of
gosh.
curiosity.
Fine, do you? But I'll continue my little spiel. So yeah, our education here in America sucks. Yes, going through government is one means of improving our education system. But there have been movements in the past where education was done more through the people themselves taking it upon themselves to create their own education system and less through relying on the government to provide a satisfactory education system. Their entire, like, whatchamacallit, the whole rap, I think Bohemian period was about people educating themselves, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. I'm not a history major, obviously. But there's also this other whole historical period in Florence where they went back to roots of Greek thought and Greek philosophy and Roman thought and Italian thought. The people immersed themselves in the culture, and the people in charge of politics aided in that because for them that was the preservation of oneself, was preservation of oneself on an education on cultural level, and this was even the best way to prevent true conquest. Is the easiest part of conquering a country is the military part. The hardest part is capturing the heart of the people themselves to stay and not rebel and not be like, no, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
It's why
Which
Britain had an easy
is
time.
it's interesting that the Romans did exactly that, which is why
Mhm.
they survived for so long.
Exactly.
Rome, contrary to what people think, while it was extremely strong militarily, it
Yeah.
couldn't be everywhere at once all the time. And it
Mm-hmm.
still had a huge empire because of the Romans' shrewd idea of spreading their own culture, essentially,
On top
which
of that,
people
go on.
found beneficial, really.
On top of that, what really killed Rome was its in the end of its expansion, it expanded really freaking quick. It expanded really quick. These terms like barbarian and whatnot were arising to create otherness within places that you conquered, creating individuals who are unsatisfied, unhappy, going against. There was a moral decline in Rome as well because of the how the upper class are more caring about, lost this notion of what ruling truly is. But you see, before that, Rome survived for such a long time because of its original roots of slow expansion and assimilation. Even the Incan Empire, one of the fastest expanding empires in history, you can look it up. It's within only a few hundred years that they were able to take over uh, quite a good chunk of South America. Did so because of assimilation, even before most of their conquests wasn't even through military expansion. They assimilated other cultures into their empire, exchanged values, created a sense of belonging by those other cultures, which led to this huge expansion of the Incan Empire in a quick time, mind you. And the only reason they fell was because of, okay, so one, there was a civil war between two brothers who were both
Can I make a very broad guess? Politics.
That's one. There are three reasons why they fell. The Civil War. So when the emperor died, he had two sons. He had two sons, and the two sons, like one was named emperor, the other one wasn't. But the other son decided, I want to be emperor, and so they fought, and that was the Civil War. So it wasn't even
Common
a civil
story.
war. Huh?
A very common story.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It wasn't even between a civil war between the people and the empire and the government. It was a civil war. It was a schism within the government itself. That's one reason. Plague, because of the spread of smallpox. The Spaniards had already, I think, taken over at Tenochtitlan and the Aztecs by this point. So smallpox was already present and spreading. And three, because of the Spanish conquistadors, Pizarro coming over and basically taking advantage of a already weakened situation.
Yep.
So, but you think of this, that like this notion of assimilation, not military conquest, is what led to like these empires growing so large. So people forget. Anyway, I went on a little bit of spiel there.
It's
My
all right.
point My point, going back to apathy, is that even if you're going to participate in civil disobedience for certain things, doesn't mean there aren't other things you can do. I abstain from the government system because it prefer. I'm not saying that I do. I'm saying one can abstain from the government system because it prefers military conquest. America has a strong military background. A military conquest over education priority of the excellence of its individual citizens. So one can abstain from that. That doesn't excuse them from actually not doing anything else. That's where laziness comes in and slacktivism. Yes, my education system sucks, and I no longer support the people who make it suck because they're just going to do so. So instead, but if I choose to not put the fork in any socket, just put it down and do nothing, then I'm still kind of at fault. I'm better than, maybe, I don't want to say better. Better is a terrible word. I have made a conscious decision that puts me separate from many other people who choose to adhere to the system. There's nothing wrong with that either, as long as they're trying to think about the best possible way. But if I have an issue with the education system and I'm not trying to educate myself or trying to promote the sense of education, then what's the point? I mean, for example, me, I have an issue with the current education system, but I will be debating people back and forth, even if it's headache inducing, to the point where people who know me and care about me will criticize me. But because I'm trying to educate individuals, I'm trying to, yeah, go on.
Would it be safe to put it this way? To quote Kreia, um, even death is better, is preferable to apathy, because then at least you're fertilizing the soil and you're feeding the worms.
Yeah.
So essentially what apathy boils down to is you being there but not really being connected to anything. And so whether you're there or not, it makes no difference.
Exactly.
When you become a part of the world, of how should we call it, of the world organism, that stops functioning in any sort of way and stops interacting with any sort of thing, then you might as well not be there. Uh,
That's the point.
so
So
now that's actually what I just said is extremely dangerous at the same time. And I wouldn't fully subscribe to it because it opens up the way for some very dangerous ideas, some rather Nazi ideas. Um, so
what
I don't want to go down that road, but what I really mean is that what's important, what defines apathy, is that you as a human being um, need to somehow at least influence other human beings. Being a hermit and helping out nature is actually preferable to apathy, complete apathy.
yeah,
Uh, oh, there's really levels of apathy. Like the person could be apathetic to the human race, for example, and I wouldn't really blame them for it at this point. But that doesn't really excuse that human being to go ahead uh, and actually, not try to produce anything.
no, you're right. I see. The thing about apathy is like apathy is to take your existence and squander it because you might as well unexist, like you said. Now, just so that we avoid Nazi ideals and everything, because I agree
Yeah.
with you. The thing about fascism, which is I'm going to put on the other extreme, is action for action's sake. There
Yeah.
are two great videos on this notion of like fascism, which I'll send you the links, Dan, and you could post the link on the description for this.
By the way, before you continue, when you brought up fascism, I want to get something very, very. I want to make it very, very clear because a lot of people don't understand what fascism is. Um,
Well,
uh,
that's a complicated topic in itself.
yeah, but a lot of people have an idea that fascism and Nazism are right-wing ideas,
No,
some sort of radical ideas, and that's completely wrong. um, what people don't realize is that fascism, Nazism, communism, socialism, they're all on the same side. They're all on that very left wing spectrum. So we need to get that, uh, we need to make it very clear.
On top of that, though, like we also have to remember that so Nazism and fascism aren't two things next to each other.
Yeah.
Nazism is a branch of fascism, but they are also not equatable. You can't say that
Uh,
fascism is Nazism and
I would
Nazism is fascism.
I would say that fascism is actually on the political spectrum, while Nazism is actually a philosophy.
No, you see, the thing is,
It's
it's
more of a philosophical idea that people subscribe to rather than a political system. Because
well, see,
fascism is a system, Nazism isn't.
it's weird because I'll agree with you, but I'll also say that this is why it's weird that Nazism is a particular form of fascism.
Yeah.
Because what fascism is and again I'll link several articles that you could put in the description so that everybody can read according to like there's this article on earth fascism and everything and two great videos which I can't recall the names of but credit to their makers. Fascism is action for the sake of action, which is terrible too because one of the
Can you explain that? Because a lot of people might not understand what you mean.
meaning so fascism is this notion that to be a hero one must go out and do actions, never mind considering the consequence, never mind actually trying to figure out the repercussions. It is doing actions because actions are the most necessary thing. It is action
What I
without
mean
thought.
is when fascism is mentioned, most people think of the Nazi regime or Mussolini and these political regimes. But what is it actually?
That's the thing.
Just so people understand what you're trying to
that's
get
the
at.
thing. Fascism is very hard to define because it's not an actual system. That's why I say Nazism is a particular system, because Nazism was fascism with an idea. Whereas, for example, Mussolini's fascism didn't actually have a particular core idea. Like, fascism doesn't have to have a core idea at all. It is simply kind of controlling the people by willing them into action towards the will of leading parties of that fascist movement. So any form of action is a must, specifically action against an other, can create a fascist society. That's why it's so hard to like pin down what fascism really is.
And that is what I would like to point out. It's what makes those systems so attractive at certain points in history.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people don't understand how somebody like Hitler, for example, could ever rise to power, when actually he provided a lot of solutions to Germany's problems at the time,
Yeah.
and he did solve a lot of those issues
Yeah.
while he was in power, while creating a lot of other issues.
Yeah, of course.
At the same time.
And so here's the thing. So we talk about apathy, and how it's bad to be apathetic, but like again, action for the sake of action is not good either. One of the number one Nazi excuses for why they did what they did was, I was following orders. I was doing an action without thinking about what I was actually doing. So apathy.
I was doing my duty.
Exactly. That's why even this question of duty has to be thought about carefully, because duty isn't what another person subscribes
It can become an
upon.
excuse to be apathetic.
Exactly. Wait, say that again?
It can become an excuse for your apathy.
Yeah, in fact, here's another thing. Action for action's sake is still a form of apathy, actually.
Exactly.
There's the apathy of inaction, but there's also the apathy of action, where I'm doing what I'm doing without care as to the consequences of what I'm doing, or without care at all. This is also why I link apathy to the idea of the self, like a sort another branch of selfishness, because when you pointed out that part of the etymology of the word is without suffering, right? Think about that notion that I don't want to suffer, therefore I will either not do or I will do. As I said earlier, there's this sense of self-preservation that comes with apathy. I wash my hands because I don't want to be involved. I don't want to be involved in the consequences that may come out of this. So without feeling, without suffering, especially in a world where if we want shit to get better, we need to suffer. Struggle is part of our existence.
It is. But yeah, I mean, we've gone very far from where we started. Think of that. We started from Star Wars. Look at where we ended up.
I know, right? But I will say one more thing. The true like another part of terribleness of apathy is that when you back out of something, and again, we're not talking about inaction, because I think we've stated cases where there's such thing as moral inaction, either refusing to participate in something because it is an unjust system, or choosing to stand by and wait for the right time to be part of it. Apathy, as we said, you make your existence a form of non-existence. Yeah. But non-existence has to be filled in. Voids get filled. Apathy, yes, you step out and you think it's fine, but you make place for something else to step in without having any say of it whatsoever. And normally, things that would fall under the term of evil, a very complex term in itself, look for opportunities to arise. Even when you act, but you act in apathetic ways, as we said the Nazis did, They took their existence into non-existence by not caring, by not having a will, but then allowed their actions to be governed and willed by something else towards a terrible end. Same thing when you don't act. When you don't act, you give way for others to act without having any decision. This is why, like, again, I disagree with with Papito Kin on what he thinks was the best thing, because by standing out of that situation and saying, you guys do what you want, yeah, you don't get any benefit or loss, but then you give the decision to everybody else to make for you as to what will be Krea's fate. This is why, like, I stress the importance of duty that is reflected upon. But I also stress the importance that apathy, which is in itself small-minded, because you're thinking not in context of a reality grander than yourself and your repercussions in it. You're thinking of it in such a small context as this is what will either immediately affect me, without caring about how it'll affect others, or I won't be affected at all, or it doesn't matter. You're thinking in such a small context that I don't want to make it say it in an insulting way, but you are thinking with a limited, very small, narrow scope, as opposed to how we as human beings have a responsibility to think, which is large-minded. Kant said that we are given this faculty of reason, which for him, reason is not like rational thinking. Reason is just like our altruistic tendencies, our tendencies to be able to think much larger than the scope of ourselves. We're given these to us, and therefore they must have some purpose to us, otherwise we wouldn't have them. To neglect that is to neglect the reality of ourselves.
Yeah, I do think thinking is a very big part of apathy, and it brings me back to what Krea said at the end of that clip in a different sort of scene, in a completely different situation, but it's still a very interesting statement. Never doubt what you have done.
Yeah.
Now, there's two sides to that, and I think she means it in a certain way, but it's also good to think about the opposite side of that. Doubting what you've done is wisdom. You cannot ever not doubt what you have done, because then if you stop doubting your decisions, you become a tyrant on whatever scale. You can become a tyrant in your own life. You can become a tyrant to other people. You can become a very horrible person by never doubting yourself.
Exactly.
So that's the dark side of what she's saying. But I think she means it in a more altruistic sense, as in, don't waste your life in doubting your decisions.
Yeah,
because if
you're right.
Which comes back to what you're saying about, not doing anything from self-preservation point of view. Like, if you keep doubting yourself, and I think people like me are very prone to that, doubting yourself and your capacity to decide, to make a judgment, out of fear of not being wrong.
Yeah, that too.
That is another form of apathy, which is probably even more dangerous than actually abstaining.
Yeah, because it's
consciously.
It's like the will and want to be good, but never the realization of it. Because, in fact, you have the means, but you who have the means and knowingly have the means still squander it. For a terrible excuse of I wanted to make sure. At the end of the day,
It's
you
a
got to make a
it's
decision, or a decision will be
fear.
made for you.
It's really what it boils down to. It's fear. So that's
Exactly.
which leads to this form of apathy. Um,
Fear
so apathy
talks to
is
the
what,
dark side.
yeah. uh, so you have uh, you have a form of apathy which is actually not feeling anything. But then there's another form of apathy which is brought about by feeling fear, fear of being wrong,
Yep.
um, and that's fine. You have to accept that, and I think that's what Kreia was trying to say when she said, "Never doubt what you have done.
Yeah.
Never fear your mistakes, because if you do, then your mistakes are going to bring you down." You
Yep.
have to stop fearing them, and you have to start looking at them, uh, confronting them, and
Mm-hmm.
going forward from them. Because otherwise, you will become an apathetic human being, or whatever
Mm-hmm.
being, if you're in Star Wars, um,
Oh my gosh, shut up.
um, which becomes cancerous. It might as well not be there because you're so preoccupied with not doing anything that in the end your life will fly by, and in the end you're going to regret uh, your life
Yeah.
because you haven't done anything in it,
Exactly.
um,
And
which
even
is
if
actually even more frightening than making a
and,
mistake.
and even if you don't regret it, even if you can because there are some people who really are selfish, and I remember this one person I was speaking to basically said all of morality is a farce, and what happens to others I don't care about because it's happening to them. And then I literally asked, what if a innocent child in a world where there is no uh, mass population is being killed? They're like, oh well, it's not happening to me, so it doesn't matter. It's like people also have to realize this: you live for a limited amount of time. We live for oh so many years, but the entirety of the future is built upon how we present ourselves in this world. We may die after a certain time, but the repercussions to our actions will persist till the end of existence, because the future world is built upon the foundations of the present that we lay upon and the past that we are dealing with.
Um, one one very important point that I have to make really is that trying to convince an apathetic person uh, of the wrongness of their apathy is actually completely fruitless, because an apathetic person does not care in the first place. So they don't even care that you're having this conversation. Uh, an apathetic person has no relationship with other people. And so talking about empathy in any sort of sense doesn't register, and it has no value to them whatsoever. Uh, and actually doing that is in itself, arguing with such a person is in itself pointless. It's a complete waste of time.
Mm,
Uh, Kreia is very, very good at managing her time.
yeah.
During the entire game, she keeps cutting people off who she deems worthless of talking to. The only person she really has meaningful conversations with is the exile, because she sees that person as somebody that she can impart something to,
Yeah.
that something can grow out of that. She realizes that no other companion can understand what she's talking about better than the exile. And she can argue with them, and she does at certain points, because people traveling together, it's inevitable, especially when you have somebody so controversial as Kreia. So yes, arguments do arise, but she cuts them off.
I hear you.
Very, very quickly. And I think that's a very healthy attitude. While it might seem harsh, at the same time, the conversation we're having right now, we wouldn't really have with somebody who is actually apathetic. You cannot discuss apathy with an apathetic person. While that may seem strange, it's just that it brings no fruit whatsoever. They will get frustrated, you will get frustrated. In the end, none of you will change, and nothing has been gained. The only thing is that time has been lost, unless there is another person around you who listens and thinks about it.
Especially when you, no. Especially when you, in fact, that's actually why I think debates are stupid. Like science versus, like, whether God exists with a scientist versus a religious person. I find those debates worthless between the actual individuals doing the debating, and having more worth for the audience at hand. People are set in their ways. So even for me, like thinking back on that conversation, which I've been doing so for a few days now, I don't know why. At most, I come up with the idea that I will point out how small-minded their view is, how small world, but that's the best I can do. And even now, I come to a point where I
and
realize,
to them, it's an opinion. For them, that's your opinion, and even that is just a waste of words.
Exactly. And so, like, even now, I've come to this point where, like, I'm less worried and focused about the individuals who are set in their ways and will say whatever to defend it. I'm more focused on individuals who are open-minded, who are willing, because, like, these are the only individuals you can, like, really get to, you know? I mean, even Socrates, who questioned people for the sake of getting to wisdom, was killed by individuals who were set in their ways, but was embraced by individuals who were learning. He was embraced by the youth versus being killed by the elders, you know?
And that's why I kind of think that, many people would laugh at people like us who make YouTube videos, who discuss things all the time, and they say, why? Why waste your time doing this discussion when nobody's gonna hear you? And it's actually, it's true. It is true that having these sorts of discussions all the time with the same person is useless. Unless somebody gets to hear you. Which is actually why we started doing these podcasts, I think.
Yeah. I've wanted to, like, because then, see, even we are bound to have something wrong in what we say. That's another part of it. All of knowledge and understanding is a matter of the shoulders of giants. Everyone is built upon what previously comes before. So we could be completely wrong about bullshit, right? But for
Did you
anybody
just call us
listening,
giants?
shut up. We're sharing the ideas of giants previous to us, like Kant and Martin Luther King. Come at me, let's go. Although hopefully we do become giants in our own way. But I mean, I'm a pretty tall dude, and I think you're a tall dude too. Oh, well, we're decently tall. Anyway, back on point. Yeah. So even though we're discussing and we may be prone to being wrong about things, this leaves room for others to listen to us
And
and
talk.
and talk and doubt what we say and question it and
It,
take our ideas farther than what, because technically even taking ideas for what they are without doubting or questioning is another form of apathy. Actually, it's a form of just not having your own input, not putting your own presence, just letting your presence be filled by something else.
well,
So
it does depend because, for example, if you're a person who doesn't really know yet and is still making up their mind, it's okay to keep to yourself and think things through. I
oh
think
yeah,
both of us have done that at one point or another, and it's not really being apathetic. It's more like taking the time to really think these
so
important things through.
let
As
me let
long
me
as eventually it brings some sort of fruit, because
as
um, any tree that gives good fruit is good. But if a tree doesn't give fruit, it will get cut down. It,
so
it
let me be specific. Well, let me enhance what I was saying, or like change it a little. Don't take knowledge just for what it is. To think through it is to mull over it, to kind of look at it from angles and say, hmm, this is interesting here. Where does this fit in? This is interesting here. Where does this fit in? But to just accept for the sake of accepting, that leads to like the terribleness of dogmatic thinking, and
And
which
this is actually this mulling process is important, and it's one of the definitions of meditation.
mm-hmm.
I think it's the original definition of meditation.
Yeah, to
Uh,
reflect upon.
reflection. Today we have a very modern, new age idea of what meditating means. To
Well,
sort
it's
of
a more of like an Eastern.
empty your mind and become a blank slate.
It's more of an Eastern idea that's been like taken upon by a lot of New Age. But even that notion of emptying your mind isn't like, I used to think that Taoism and the master who follows the Tao does nothing. I used to think that that was a form of apathy and that
Mm.
Buddhism was a form of apathy, but it really isn't. It's a different thing entirely. So don't get confused by those. But we can talk about that another time. Go on.
Yeah, we can leave uh, those sorts of talks for another podcast because this one is getting kind of long now.
Yeah, I know. I think it's almost like an hour 30 to 2 hours.
How long has it been? Let's check it out. Uh, it's been almost 2 hours. Look at that.
Okay, so we're gonna call it, and
Yeah,
we're
we
gonna
should
be
probably
like,
call it a night. But yeah, that was very interesting to me at least.
no, same here.
And this is the point where I would encourage anyone that sees the video and has seen it up to this point. Congratulations if you have. Uh, you've listened to all of our bullshit. um,
Hey, I take my bullshitting very seriously. Then.
um, but uh, if you have, and you have, I'm sure you would have your own thoughts on these subjects, on at least one thing we've said or we've mentioned. Feel free to comment, tell us what you think. Both of us are very interested in what people think, as you can see. I personally love uh, understanding what other people believe in. Um, you know, as a teacher by profession, or at least one of my professions, um, I want to understand what other people mean, how other people think, and even maybe help them express what they believe. Um,
I agree. In
so
fact,
feel free, comment, share your thoughts, and anything that comes to mind, really.
Stan, do you think it'd be a good idea to like also link our email address for like lengthy things? That's question. We'll figure it out. Anyway, you if it's there, it's there. It's not, it's not. But this video is running pretty long, so
Yeah. Maybe we could. I guess we could put a link to our email address where people can just send us thoughts, ideas, maybe even questions they want us to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a definite future thing we can do.
Cool. Okay. So anyway, this was
Yeah,
fun. I enjoyed our
absolutely.
conversation, Stan.
You too.
And I look forward to seeing y'all next Sunday. Or like, yeah, talking to y'all and Stan next Sunday.
Absolutely.
Have
Have
a
a
good
nice
one,
day,
everybody.
everybody. If you enjoy this video, remember to subscribe and follow us on social media.